they call themselves men's rights activists.
You are listening to AVFM Radio, the voice of Europe. This is the news.
This Tuesday, July 9, a joint meeting took place in the European Parliament between the Committee on Legal Affairs and the Committee on Women's Rights and Gender Equality in the European Parliament. The purpose of the meeting was to have a final discussion on the European Commission's proposal for a directive of the European Parliament and of the Council on improving the gender balance among non-executive directors of companies listed on stock exchanges and related measures. The proposal belongs to our favorite European commissioners, the feminist ideologue Viviane Reding. Basically, after this discussion, this monstrosity will be subjected to a vote in the European Parliament and it will soon become a law. The document states that, quote, the purpose of the proposal is to substantially increase the number of women on corporate boards throughout the EU by setting a minimum objective of 40% presence of the underrepresented sex among the non-executive directors of companies listed on stock exchanges and by requiring companies with a lower share of their underrepresented sex among the non-executive directors to introduce pre-established, clear, neutrally formulated and unambiguous criteria in selection procedures for those positions in order to attain the objective. The proposal seeks to promote gender equality in economic decision-making and to fully exploit the existing talent pool of candidates for more equal gender representation on company boards, thereby contributing to the Europe 2020 objectives. The proposed directive will lead to breaking down the barriers that women face when aiming for board positions and to improved corporate governance as well as enhanced company performance. End of quote. Just listen to the language. The meeting was chaired by Mikael Gustafsson from the Nordic Green Left and co-chaired by Evelyn Regner from the Socialist Alliance. And in the good old European leftist style, Evelyn Regner tried to sell this as an issue of creating flexibility. Evelyn Regner.
Now, of course, we are dealing with the scope, with the issue of whether it's binding and with sanctions. But at the start, it's very important to look at the issue of why we're having a report on the Commission's proposal. The report and the draft directive respects the fact that there should be greater flexibility for the member states and businesses when it comes to implementation. So what we're suggesting here isn't a method where we're imposing anything on the companies. No, they have a great deal of room for manoeuvre when it comes to how to implement this. Now, the aim is to have 40% of the underrepresented sex on boards, i.e. women on boards, and to have that through appropriate, transparent selection procedures. Now, we could have thought we could achieve it voluntarily. However, it doesn't work, because back in 1984 and then 1996, the Council called upon companies to achieve a gender balance through a voluntary basis. However, nothing has happened, so there's been very little progress, and any progress that has been achieved has only been in those countries that at some point decided it was necessary to introduce binding measures.
Just listen to the language. Forcing private companies to employ whomever the European Union wants is now progress. Up is down, freedom is slavery. Evelyn Regner again.
France is a very positive example, and so is Italy, and there have been achievements, and that is sufficient justification for the fact that we should act at EU level.
So because two countries made a stupid thing, then we should all do the same thing, regardless of the fact that a lot of small businesses from Italy relocated to Romania or shut down completely, or the fact that France is in a de facto state of bankruptcy according to their own Minister of Employment. But then again, why should the hard numbers stay in the way of the progress? Until recently, only big companies were subjected to similar crap, but now the progress cannot wait anymore. Evelyn Regner again.
We consider it's very important to arrange the scope in such a way that as many companies as possible should achieve the objective. Now, there shouldn't be a minimum program of achieving the quotas, but as many companies as possible should achieve that objective. So in the scope we've included SMEs.
Evelyn Regner then continued to call for creating more bureaucracies and more red tape in order to ensure that the EU has, quote, proper monitoring tools, end of quote, in order to sanction the businesses that dare to stay in the way of progress. Rodi Kratsa-Tsakarapoulou from the Maoist Barroso's party went further and made it clear that the report is not up for rejection, but up for improvement. Rodi Kratsa.
And we've come up with this draft today, and we hope that you'll be able to look kindly upon it and indeed make your own contributions to this report. We do, as I say, ask you to look kindly upon this because this is new in the sense that this legislation is really talking about very tangible proposals.
So, as we can see, because the report comes with tangible statist measures, one should look kindly upon it and pretend it's not a piece of legislation that would severely infringe upon the economic freedom of individuals. And this comes from a Greek MEP whose country is now tormented by famine thanks to many factors, including the progress of the European Union. This same MEP then pursued in justifying this legislation by saying that the EU should not deprive the small businesses from the fruits of state-imposed diversity, regardless of the fact that a non-regulated issue is not deprivation at all. Then the floor was given to the attending MEPs, who proceeded in a circle jerk of patting each other on the back. First, Silvana Koch-Merin from the Alliance of Liberals tried to justify this legislation based on another committee and had this to say.
So, what happened in the IMCO committee? Well, on the 30th of May, the opinion was adopted. 27 members voted in favor, 3 members were against the opinion, and 3 abstained. So it's a very strong signal, I can see, in favor of that directive. There wasn't too many amendments, and in general, the reactions to the Commission proposal the reactions were very positive.
Again, the same old claptrap. Positive, progress, opinion adopted, etc. So in her mind, just like in most Eurofanatics' minds from Brussels, if 27 out of 33 people in some committee in Brussels voted for an opinion, then that opinion should be adopted by 28 nations. Isn't the European Union wonderful? However, the establishment seemed to have some concerns. Rebecca Taylor, also from the Alliance of Liberals, explains.
However, I have some concerns with the Commission proposal as it's currently drafted and with some of the changes in Mrs. Regner's draft report. I think the Commission proposal is not ambitious enough and the scope does not go far enough. When it comes to gender equality, there shouldn't be a difference between executive and non-executive positions. I'm also not convinced that putting obligation on companies at the highest level without considering a broader approach is the way forward. The only way to improve and have real change for businesses is for them to own the gender balance issue.
In other words, not only it's not statist enough, but it doesn't include ways to persuade businesses to actually believe in the party line. Also, notice the keywords "going forward", which are all too present in Brussels. Their mentality is that the world always goes forward and any decision they make is inherently better than any decision made 20 years ago or somewhere in the past. She goes then even further and explains that the EU now has an establishment in which positive discrimination for men exists.
We can also name and shame companies, not a problem. And I think changes should not only be at board level, but all levels of companies, so administrative, executive, management levels. And I think Mrs. Regner's point about transparent recruitment is very important, and it also should apply at all levels, not just for non-executive board directors. The argument that women aren't ready for boards is false. We have a pool of qualified women in Europe, but they're not getting onto boards. Why is this? It's because we currently have positive discrimination for men. Peer-reviewed studies show that female board members are more highly qualified and experienced than their male counterparts, indicating a gender penalty for women and a gender bonus for men.
Is it true that peer-reviewed studies have shown that female board members are more highly qualified than men? No, but facts and EU policy have never gone hand in hand. She then concludes that only enforcing quotas won't work, but rather involve the state even more in the leadership of the companies would provide a better result. Rebecca Taylor.
To conclude, I think that enforcing quotas at EU level will not achieve the aims of greater gender equality in the long term. We need to look at countries which have succeeded with initiatives and require companies to set targets at all levels, not just non-executive positions, management level executive positions, and require them to report in detail on their diversity policies, including gender equality, in a clear and transparent way.
So, in other words, one now needs to report to the state on how the business is conducted. This sounds exactly like the first days of the Soviet Union, right prior to the nationalization days. And this is exactly why Mr. Godfrey Bloom, the only sane voice in the chamber from Europe for Freedom and Democracy, points out.
Look, in a free society, it isn't the role of politicians, especially those politicians with so little commercial experience, to decide on who should sit on a board of a private company. It's a concept worthy of the old Soviet Union. In England, professional women are deeply hostile to the concept of gender quotas. They are committed to meritocracy. When they negotiate both internally and externally, they want everybody to know that they got there on their abilities, not to make up the numbers. Some British political parties have had a gender quota system. We've had in England Blair's babes, we've had Cameron's cuties. We've seen young women put in an impossible position. One product of the British Conservative Party gender quota system produced a junior minister who did not know the difference between the national debt and the national deficit. Women are often culturally attracted to certain professions. They are overrepresented in radiography, physiotherapy and other clinical professions, equally represented now in the law and financial services, underrepresented in manufacturing. Such variations are natural and healthy in a free society. My own party, UKIP, has no gender quotas, yet in the last 3 very successful by-elections, those results have been produced by women. Women's success in the retail trade is world-renowned. We had a women chief executive of W.H. Smith, Body Shop, and many, many others, all headed up by women. Last year in England, more than 50% of small businesses were started by women. I've seen them personally perform at sea with the Royal Navy. I've seen them work in bomb disposal in Afghanistan. Trust them. Why do you have such little faith in women that they need political patronage? Trust them, have faith in them. It'll pay dividends for you in the future.
Mr. Bloom is correct, but what he doesn't realize yet is that the European Union is no longer, or is on the verge of no longer being, a free society. Angelika Niebler, German MEP, was the only voice besides Godfrey Bloom's who had objections to this nonsense, but her objections were aimed at the structure of the nonsense and not at the whole nonsense. Angelika Niebler.
There are 2 areas where I disagree with the proposal from the rapporteurs. First of all, I think it's going too far to include the SMEs here. If you look at the figures with SMEs in the last few years, or in the last 20 years in fact, the presence of women has grown a great deal. About 30% of SMEs are directed by women, and with new companies that are set up, it's more than 40% being set up by women. So I think in the light of these positive trends with SMEs that are not structured in the same way as the listed companies, I think we are going too far if we include those in our scope. I don't think we need to. Now, the German delegation in my group is very much against this, so I simply cannot support any rules that would extend the scope to SMEs.
So she has a problem with including small and middle enterprises, SMEs, and with including businesses that have less than 10% women or men, such as nursery houses or construction business. But overall, she still agrees with the idea of the state poking its nose into the internal affairs of the business. Marina Yannakoudakis from the ECR agrees with the idea but thinks that SMEs should be left out and the issue should be handled by the nations and not by the bureaucracy. Marina Yannakoudakis.
There is no doubt here that we all want more women in boards, in all forms of life. Diversity makes it for a richer form of working. But the question is, do we want voluntary or do we want quotas in? First of all, before we say voluntary isn't working, UK's had a 5% increase this year. France has had a 7% increase. Now, I understand France is going to have compulsory quotas. Not a problem, up to the French what they do, but it's very much a member state. I don't want the European Union working in this area. You've talked about the scope. As a woman who ran my own SME, I'm horrified at the idea of having quotas in SMEs. It's difficult enough to run a small company without having over bureaucracy and interference, and we really need to let the companies work as they wish. As has been mentioned by the previous speaker, companies have different gender balances depending on what they're doing, the construction industry being a good example, although nowadays even that's having more women, and it's up to women where they work. But the real question is, what are we doing to help more women in business? Quotas are going to end up having the golden skirt scenario, as they're called in Norway. I'll be having a public hearing on that in September, where I'll have actually women who run businesses, and they'll be able to give you different ideas on how we can get more women into companies. So maybe we should listen to what is said there. But the real issue is how to get the pathway, how to get more women into business, how to get more people engaging. And I particularly liked your amendment number 2, which actually works on the pathway. The only problem is it needs to focus a little bit more and it needs to expand. Name and shame is good. Voluntary sharing of best practice, and I'm concerned about binding, how you're going to make it binding. You're just going to end up having companies leaving Europe and working in other countries where it's not binding.
The best part of Marina Yannakoudakis' speech is that we didn't get to hear about the progress claptrap, but essentially it seems that nobody seems to notice that forcing companies to employ whomever the state wants is inherently moronic. Constance Le Grip, French MEP, had basically the same thing to say as all the feminists in the chamber. Eva Lichtenberger from the Green Left also rushed into stressing that voluntary measures don't work because women seem to be stubborn enough not to go to work wherever the politically correct MEPs want. After that, she rushed into attacking Mr. Bloom. Eva Lichtenberger.
My colleague Bloom. Well, I'd like to recommend to you to read the speeches concerning the bringing in of vote for women in Tyrol in Austria. That was about 100 years ago. Your arguments haven't changed. They're the same as those that were brought forward in Tyrol 100 years ago. Thank you.
Is there any connection between stamping out economic freedom and the meeting that took place over 100 years ago in Austria? No, but in the good old feminist style, throw whatever accusation possible and hope something sticks is a principle in which Mrs. Lichtenberger seems to believe. Oh, did I say Mrs.? Mrs. is also an illegal term in the European Parliament. Britta Thomsen, Danish MEP from the Socialist Alliance, makes it clear for us that the right to decide whom you wish to employ is already non-existent. Britta Thomsen.
I think it's very important that we also see this directive in the scope of stopping discrimination. We know that women today are better educated than men in all of Europe, and though we still see that women are missing in managerial level. So it's a question of discrimination. And I'm very sorry that Mr. Bloom, he left, because he said we are in a free society where everyone can decide who they want to hire for the boards or not. But they cannot, because we have a legislation on that in Europe. We have anti-discrimination. It's not allowed to choose who you want in your board.
Really, Mrs. Thompson? Well, if that's the case, and unfortunately it is no wonder that recession is hitting more and more countries. Then Marie Cornelissen from the Green Left took the floor to brag about what she adopted in her small committee that nobody has ever heard of.
Another thing we did was to give far more room for different ways of recruitment, appointment, election, and as there was in the original proposal, because companies should have the freedom to apply different sorts of methods as long as they are adapted to lead to more women.
Did you hear that? Companies should have the freedom to do whatever they want as long as they do exactly what the European Union wants. And how does she understand this freedom? Marie Cornelissen.
Is to make sure that member states and companies that do well are left alone as much as possible on the one hand, but that member states and companies that do badly and that are unwilling to make a change are targeted and forced to take action. So I think the opt-out is a very good idea. I think it should be even freer. Member states should notify the European Commission and they should okay whatever. If a member state has faith, such as Britain perhaps, that its own measures will reach the target, then good luck with it. We'll then assess that in 2017, and if by then it hasn't gone up to 30% at least to be on track, then automatically the directive will start applying.
So basically, if you have to ruin your economy in order to comply with our crap, that's fine. But if you fail to comply with it, we'll come and ruin your economy anyway, because political correctness and feminist ideology matters more than the peoples of Europe's wishes. You have no reason to be afraid unless you're guilty. That's Mrs. Cornelissen's message.
Companies as well, if they start improving, they have very light reporting. They should have very light reporting obligations. But if they still appoint men or the overrepresented sex, they need to explain much further. They need to take measures. And only then, if they refuse to explain, if they refuse to take measures and are unwilling, that is when the sanctions will apply. And I think that gives a really good balance, and nobody that does well, member states or companies, need be afraid, and those that are doing badly do need.
So, are we clear? Soon enough you will have to explain to the Orwellian state of the European Union how dare you employ more men than the number allowed by the Big Brother. The last speaker was Astrid Lulling, who apparently discovered that even within the Orwellian framework of the European Union, this nonsense is basically illegal. Astrid Lulling.
Moi, je peux être très bref, Monsieur le Président, si on veut vraiment nuire.
I can be very brief, Chair. If you really want to damage promoting women's interests, then you come up with this kind of a report. I've been talking with Mrs. Niebler about it. It's really exaggerated. I think if we do this report this way, it'll have the same effect as the report on protection of mothers, which is also something which was ignored by Council. I have a point of principle I have to make. I don't think there's any valid legal basis in the treaty to impose these kind of rules on private companies, rules for choosing their management. Perhaps these people who are that enthusiastic should do that in their country as well.
But then again, the lack of legal framework shouldn't be a problem for the European Union, just like when it wasn't with other industries or other private aspects of life, or for that matter, just like it wasn't with the European Constitution, which was rejected twice through referenda, and then it was rebranded as the Lisbon Treaty and imposed upon the peoples of Europe through indoor meetings. The final word belonged to the rapporteur, Evelyn Regner, which echoed the words of the feminists in the chamber and briefly said that she'll take into consideration the suggestions proposed. We think we can already guess which ones of the suggestions will be taken into consideration and which ones will be conveniently forgotten. The next step after this meeting will be the vote in the plenary in the European Parliament at a date that it's not yet settled. When that will happen, the Voice of Europe will be the one informing you on the issue and encourage listeners to start writing emails to the MEPs on why this measure should never ever be put into practice. This monstrosity needs to be stopped as soon as possible. The sooner, the better.